Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Wednesday, April 19th, 2023. Time for another show. And a busy day today. Just for myself, anyway. The rest of you can knock off. Relax, sit back, I guess. Just sit and wait. We'll deliver the news at some point really soon. Let's see. What's on top of the news? It was a bit of a late day today, getting a teenage boy up and ready and out the door, so not a lot of chance to actually scan the headlines directly myself. Thankfully, we have some backup and all of that. Greg Dworkin will be with us, and let's see, Justice usually gives me some hint about what's going on in the morning, and let's see, all right, I don't know what's going on anymore. Okay, let's see. We got the Republicans have brought the debt ceiling debate down into the mud. Yeah, all right. And Inter says, Putin fingers, that's Ron DeSantis. I recognize that. Wants it's a small prison ride at Disney World. Okay. Well, so the Disney fight continues. It's getting worse. It's fantastic that he's, continues to double down on that. And of course, like we've already been reporting, we're past tripling and quadrupling, and we're now into quintupling, I guess, down on beloved Disney. So let's see how far that carries him. Even in Florida, I don't know. I know people who moved to Florida to be closer to the Disney park, so I'm not sure this is going to work out. But I don't know if I know a whole lot of Ron DeSantis fans anyway. All right, let's see. Where were we? I don't know. Oh, yes, right. I'm in the wrong email here. Jump back over to the right email where many of you might contact me and see what's going on. Okay. Oh, all right. We're going to get some hints on the debt ceiling thing. Oh, good. All right. As news comes in, here we are. All right. Very good. And a good source. You can't go wrong with Digby's Hullabaloo blog. And so, let's take a quick look. Debt ceiling slapstick. This is of course, what Justice was referring to in saying that the Republicans had brought the debt ceiling debate down into the mud. Let's see exactly what's going on here. Here's the latest, writes Digby, on the debt ceiling from TPM. I think TPM has been the biggest casualty in terms of my references and sourcing for stories in the morning since the move to Mastodon. I guess did they just not go to Mastodon? I wonder if that's what's going on. I just don't see TPM or Josh Marshall's material nearly as often as I used to on Twitter. Okay, well, anyway, here's the latest on the debt ceiling from TPM, and a sigh after that. This could easily go sideways. Oh, no doubt about that. It's a clown show, and after all, Marge Green is the shadow speaker of the House, which is incredible given how crazy she is. Kevin McCarthy, incredible enough given how dumb he is speaker in name only. And here we go. From TPM, Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy has such a tenuous grip on his own conference that the debt ceiling hostage-taking he's attempting to pull off has all the hallmarks of the bumbling kidnapping capers you see in the movies. The House GOP can't agree amongst themselves what to ask for as ransom. We've known that for some time. They can't get the White House to take them seriously enough as a ragtag band of kidnappers to engage in negotiations, because what would you negotiate over? We don't know. Right? They keep threatening dire consequences for not, for not taking them seriously, but are repeatedly hobbled by their own lack of consensus. At this point, McCarthy wants the House to vote by the end of the month on a package that combines the debt ceiling with draconian spending cuts. That's the usual formula. But he clearly doesn't have, one, internal agreement on those cuts or on how much to raise the debt ceiling by, or two, the votes to push a package through as early as next week, which is, of course, the end of the month. McCarthy is preparing to bypass the House committees altogether and cobble together a package on the floor himself. Yikes. That's according to Punchbowl. If wishing and hoping were a plan, well, lots of things would be better, but let's, I've lost my article here. Let's jump back over there. If wishing and hoping were a plan, that's all there is to it. Ellipsis and drift off into dreamland. One word of warning, political reporters are doing McCarthy a favor by calling what he's presenting publicly, including in his speech yesterday to the New York Stock Exchange, a, quote, plan. It's not a plan yet. It skews the coverage to pretend it's a plan. That's the normalizing exercise they usually go through. McCarthy is taking advantage of this journalistic failure to try to leverage pressure on the White House. The White House ain't stupid and isn't biting. And Digby concludes, I hope not. McCarthy doesn't have the votes. He doesn't even have a plan. Why would the White House interfere? And an update, Josh Marshall then tweets, this is the lunacy they're dealing with. Josh Marshall's tweet reads, he's retweeting Melanie Zanona, who writes here, leaving a meeting in Speaker McCarthy's office, Freedom Caucus Chairman Scott Perry, who really should be under arrest, but is instead a power broker here, warned that the House GOP's debt ceiling plan, if it's going to pass, it's going to have to include a repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act, because everyone loves inflation. We all want it back. Josh Marshall commenting, LOL, no debt ceiling vote without repealing the entire Inflation Reduction Act, says Freedom Caucus. It's simple. You can't negotiate with terrorists. We can't be ruled by a couple dozen degenerates in the House. And remember, when we were all told that it was the worst thing in the world by the people who love the filibuster and want to cooperate with Republicans, that the greatest danger in the world was flip-flopping back and forth. We'd be passing things and then repealing it, and then passing them and repealing them. The law would change every couple of years. And, I guess your partners in this negotiation here, Joe Manchin, love to do exactly that. And it seems that since you're not interested in using the filibuster to stop them from doing it, that's the last use of the filibuster that was actually available to you, besides, just regular extortion, which I guess was maybe the idea all along. Okay, well, that clears that up. Greg Dworkin is here. Let's clear that part up, too. You heard the chiming. He's here, ready to go. Good morning, Greg.
Hey, good morning.
Thanks.
So, there's a bunch of things that I was going to talk about and probably will.
Okay.
But since you started on this, let's finish on this.
All right.
It's really fascinating stuff. Punchbowl has a piece on this, but one of the things I think is very much worth mentioning is that part of McCarthy's plan, and absolutely in scare quotes, is that he's going to bring a vote to the House, even though he doesn't know if he has the votes for it. A really dangerous move. And people have compared this to Nancy Pelosi doing this quite a bit. Not all the time. She is just historic for being an excellent vote counter. But with a 4-vote majority, Pelosi would sometimes bring things to the floor if she thought she could pressure Democrats to go along with it, given that it was on the floor and failure was not an option. And generally that worked.
Yeah.
And the difference is that Nancy Pelosi knows what she's doing. And Democrats didn't want to fail.
Yeah.
Republicans don't care if they fail because they're much more into performative art than they are the actual science and job of governing. They literally don't care if they fail. And so McCarthy doesn't have the same tools. He doesn't have the same talents. He doesn't have the same wherewithal as Pelosi. And so it's a big joke. So Punchbowl has this piece, Speaker Kevin McCarthy. For the first time in his career, McCarthy's charting the course for House Republicans in a high-stakes negotiation. The 58-year-old McCarthy, he looks like he's 70, but he's only 58, now the top Republican in the country, has been around these types of skirmishes for the better part of a dozen years, but he's never called the shots. His strategy is to try to pass something, anything, to show he can move legislation. In McCarthy's view, this will force Biden to negotiate and shift the onus on Senate Democrats to pass their own bill. No. Biden and Senate Democrats, including Chuck Schumer, can basically say, no, we're not doing that.
Okay. Well, that's an option for them, yes.
So here are McCarthy's challenges. Number one, McCarthy wants to pass a debt limit bill with 1 week of lead time. Won't be easy, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. He's letting conservatives fill this package up with whatever they want without going through committee. Just 5 Republican no votes will sink any bill, so there's very little margin for error. That's why he has to let Scott Perry say, oh, we also want to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and while we're at it, we're going to add something that declares the South really won back in the 1800s.
Okay.
Well, fine.
That's fun.
They want that, but that doesn't mean that the Senate's going to say it's okay. Number 2, what happens if McCarthy passes the bill? Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and the White House are publicly insisting on a clean debt limit increase, and they think they can break McCarthy over this.
I don't know.
So, by the way, does Hakeem Jeffries.
Okay.
T. McCarthy says they have no intention of ever passing a clean debt limit increase, but that means after struggling to pass the bill, GOP leaders could easily find they didn't budge the Senate or White House at all.
Yes.
Number 3,
certainly
the
not
risk McCarthy is that he's advocating for all of these conservative policies, but they'll wind up on the cutting room floor. And that helps McCarthy with his right wing inside the conference, but there's no real payoff because, you can't pass a bill that way. Number 4, the calendar. And McCarthy holds a pretty bad hand here. The debt limit battlefield isn't a good one for Republicans anyway. Plus, he's dealing with a conference that's unusually interested in picking fights they can't win. McCarthy's doing what he must internally, but that doesn't resolve his larger problems. And by the way, in the process of doing this, he's not using the majority leader, Steve Scalise, at all. He's been sidelined. He sidelined his budget committee chair, Jody Arrington, who's a Scalise ally, won't let him participate.
Yeah, he's not going to like that.
So, what is he doing, really?
I don't know. Not much, I guess. This is really remarkable.
So that's why the Washington Post has a headline, House GOP puts on united front as conflict brews behind the scenes. And that's some of the conflicts that are brewing we went over. But the fact of the matter is he and Scalise kind of hate each other because they think they want each other's jobs. That is to say, McCarthy wish that he didn't have to lead, but he does. And Scalise wants to lead and wishes McCarthy didn't. And they both know it. And that's not going well. So, I just don't see how the Republicans are going to win on this. And so that was the lead story because you made it the lead story because it's your show.
Oh, right. Well, I hadn't really given it any consideration. But it's a good lead story. Why not?
Why not? It's as good a lead as any other lead story.
Yeah.
So let me do a couple of lightning round things, which we may get back to if we have time.
All right.
Because a lot of them are really interesting. But I want to talk about something else, and that's politics.
What?
This is from, where is it from? It's from Above the Law.
Oh.
A blog called Above the Law. It was a game of chicken and Fox blinked, said Liz Dye.
Oh, yes, right. That thing.
Ka-ching.
The lead news story. Okay.
So as people on Twitter are saying, there's a lot of mea, but not much culpa. So what happened is that Fox decided at the last minute to settle. Experts in the field say they're surprised it didn't happen before now.
Yes.
It's a lot of money, $787 million.
Yes.
And there's Smartmatic still to come. So it's clear Fox lost this battle. For those people who wanted Fox to be punished more, no. And for those who always want somebody else to come in and save the day, whether it's Robert Mueller or James Comey or the courts, that's not how life works. Typically what happens is you have a bad guy and they figure out in the end how they could still survive while losing somewhat. I mean, that's what happened with Alex Jones.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're going to get. You're going to get the fact that they lost and that they didn't win. Not winning is a big deal.
Yes.
They're going to have to pay a lot of money. That's a big deal, certainly to them, because it's not your money.
That's what they're there for, right?
And so it's a win. Is it the
is.
biggest win that you wanted? No, it never is going to be that.
Yeah.
So this is actually a pretty good result. Fox did have a statement saying that they acknowledged that the courts found that they lied, but they're not doing it every 5 minutes with their nighttime people. And so the question still remains, does that really matter? And the answer is yes, it does.
Okay.
If you don't,
well, that was fast.
If you don't follow Fox News, what happens is they say all sorts of outrageous things. And if they don't say outrageous things, those people who want to hear outrageous things simply go to another channel like One American News. In a sense, it matters, and there's some recent academic research showing that the reach of Fox News is well beyond its limited viewership. Because, for example, other outlets are always talking about it, just like we're talking about it right now. But at the same time, it is limited, and you're not going to convince the MAGA people to do anything other than what they do. That never matters. It's the independents, and the independents don't necessarily respect what Fox News is doing, and this doesn't help because the news is out there. Everybody's heard it. They know they lost, and that's a big deal.
It is. And, $787 million, that's not nothing. There's other lawsuits coming. And Dominion has other lawsuits against the other networks.
Well, not just that. I mean, sure, Smartmatic is coming, but actually what's also coming are Fox News shareholders suing Fox.
Right. That's true, too.
So those are probably the biggest ones.
And, the amount of money, it's nice to see them punished. That's certainly true. But what everybody was hoping for were more bombshells. But, that's why the experts were so baffled by this late settlement. The bombshells, I'm sure there are worse. There are worse. They must have been protecting worse in order to move to settle. But you got all the ammunition you needed. Really,
right, but now Smartmatic knows what to ask for, so they may actually get more.
Right, and they'll say, don't give us the boring stuff. Give us the stuff that we haven't heard yet.
Yeah. Next on the, I hope we get to it a little bit more, is the Fulton County DA in Georgia, Fani Willis, is continuing to move, continuing to do things. We're still looking for the first week in May for an indictment.
That's soon.
What she's done is that she's noticed that there's things going on with this case, not just that Trump was trying to influence the election by calling Brad Raffensperger, which we all know about, but part of this case is the fact that there were false electors.
Yes.
11 of them.
That's how many they were supposed to have.
The lead one, has one set of issues. Then there were 10 others. And interestingly, a single attorney, Kimberly Burroughs Debrow, was representing all 10 of them. Probably trying to coordinate their case.
Yeah.
Turns out that she did not bring information to those false electors about plea deals and bargaining and immunity when it was offered by Willis's office.
Oh, that's not good.
So Fani Willis is asking that she be disqualified from at least some of those electors. And as the electors, who are the defendants, starting to hear about this, they're starting to turn on each other.
And
so
probably
the whole point there is Fani Willis is trying to get some of them to flip. And that's what I mean about there's a whole lot of work being done that you don't necessarily hear about. And that's going on now. And that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is something. So, you could have them turning against one another. They'll be firing that attorney. That attorney's in trouble. You can't
Tuesday's
not bring
filing, according to Georgia
deals.
Public Broadcast, GBP, PBS, NPR, state-sponsored media, according to Elon Musk. Tuesday's filing also alleged that attorney Kimberly Burroughs Debrow failed to notify her clients of potential immunity deals that prosecutors offered last summer, and comes as charging decisions are expected soon in the sweeping investigation into the Trump-led efforts to overturn the presidential election results in Georgia. Debrow and attorney Holly Pearson initially represented 11 of the 16 people who falsely signed documents claiming to be Georgia's electors, including GOP Chairman David Schaefer. But Fulton County Superior Judge Robert McBurney ruled that Schaefer took on a more active role, so he was different than the rest of them. So he had to be represented separately. Pearson agreed to be Schaefer's lawyer, and Debrow retained the remainder of the 10. The DA's filing revealed that as recently as last week, her office interviewed some of the fake electors represented by Debrow, and some of them said another elector represented by Debrow committed acts that are violations of Georgia law and that they were not party to these additional acts. That's what they told the DA. That new information means the 10 electors Debrow represents are no longer similarly situated and creates a conflict of interest that means she cannot ethically represent any of the electors anymore. So she's trying to get her thrown off the case. And made a motion to do so. I mean, it's not just speculation that she's doing that. She has a court motion to do this.
Well, okay. And then, I think she'd be in trouble with the Bar Association later on.
Well, yeah, but nobody cares about that.
Well, okay.
Except them.
Yes, right, sure. You can't do that. There you
right?
go. That's
another thing that's worth mentioning here is Supreme Court is probably going to decide today some action on the abortion pill issue, because the stay that Alito granted expires tonight at midnight.
Yes.
So it's expected they're going to take some sort of action, extend the stay, throw the case out, decide to let it stand without comment. Mm-hmm. We don't know what they're going to do, but they're going to do something today. We'll find out.
All right. Let's get it over with.
All right. Here's something you may have remembered that back in the day, which is a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago,
what a day.
Governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, who's more conservative than people want, but we got her because she got reelected, and that happened because Andrew Cuomo had to step down.
Right.
Who was terrible, and she's not so great, and she tried to appoint a conservative judge to be the chief judge of the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York State. And I think there's some move to rename it the Supreme Court, not to, confuse everybody. But the Court of Appeals in New York is the highest court. And so her conservative suggestion got thrown out. Nobody wanted to do it, which was precedent setting, because that doesn't happen in New York, but it did. And now, by a vote of 40-19, Rowan Wilson is confirmed as the next chief judge of the Court of Appeals, placing one of New York's leading liberal judges at the helm of its highest court, which is important for redistricting, gerrymandering, and other things that could have gotten 3 or 4 extra seats for New York, but didn't, because there was a conservative majority in the court who didn't go along with that.
All right. Well,
other things will come up, just like in
10
Wisconsin.
years, it'll be great.
Next, this is a note that Iowa is actively, like the rest of the Republican Party, planning on bringing back child labor. At 5 a.m. this morning, dated April 18th, 2023, so that would be yesterday, the Iowa Senate passed a child labor bill that allows 14-year-olds to work 6-hour night shifts, allow 15-year-olds to work in plants and assembly lines, and more. All Democrats voted against it, as well as 2 Republicans, since you, on occasion, a rare occasion, have a little trouble getting the teenager in the house up for school. Tell him if he doesn't get up, he's going to be working nights.
I don't know how much that scares him, but the working part probably bothers him a bit.
Yeah, well, you're in Virginia, so you never know.
Yeah, right.
I was going to say, for Connecticut, it's not really a threat, but you're in Virginia, so you know.
Yeah. Okay, well, so if we can threaten him with factory work overnight, that's a different story than being on the computer overnight.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't know what it is
they're bad
about,
people, and they're doing bad things. And why in the world? That's as bad as the reaction in Tennessee to having people shot in Nashville. The reaction of the Tennessee House was, on the one hand, to try to discipline the Tennessee 3 and throw 2 of them out, who just came back even stronger. If you strike me down, I'll return stronger.
All right.
And then their active choice in terms of passing stuff was to pass a bill decreasing liability for the gun companies.
Perfect. Yeah.
I mean, these are bad people. And so, yes, you have to vote in every single election every time.
I guess so. I don't know what the Republican fascination with child exploitation is, but they seem extraordinarily interested in practicing it and, of course, accusing everybody else of doing it.
Yeah. And so it's just weird. But you have to step back and figure every single thing Republicans do is basically not necessarily because they are people who are intellectually and ideologically inclined to do these horrible things. It's generally a lot more venal than that.
Oh.
They pass a lot of bad stuff because their friends are generally the people behind these things. Mm-hmm. We want charter schools. Why? Well, we'll tell people because it's a conservative good thing to do, because who cares about state school? Well, actually, their friends who are financing their campaigns own the charter schools.
Yes, right.
I mean, and so on and so on and so forth. You keep going down the line. Well, why are they financing all of these drug companies? Well, because they're getting a lot of money from the drug company. Well, why do they pass liability insurance for gun company? Well, because look who's funding their campaigns. And just go down the line, and just about everything they do is because somebody's paying them. In Iowa, there's chicken plucking, meat packing plants, I presume.
chicken plucking. Sounds like you're condemning them to hell, but okay.
I'm just saying,
chicken pluckers.
and probably they're getting a lot of money from these folks.
I assume so, right? Nobody wants to work anymore, so make the kids do it. Sure. Why not? Except that everybody wants to work, and you're just running out of people. And
we don't want immigrants. We'd rather have kids. First of all, they don't complain. And secondly, you pay them less.
Isn't that great? So we've gone from family separation at the border to let's separate American families.
Why should we outsource this stuff?
Right. Let's tear kids away from their families right here in America and make them pluck chickens in the morning instead of going to school. Yeah. Okay.
Weird
stuff. Good old conservative values.
That's what appears to be happening.
Yeah. Well, put a stop to it. Vote against idiots.
Yeah.
At every level.
Well, we're almost up to the 9:27 time.
Yes.
When we take a short break, and then when we come back, we're going to do a little bit about politics and where DeSantis and Trump stand on things. But I was reading recently, to carry us over just to the break, the fact that there's some polling out showing that people listen to podcasts like this one for entertainment, to get informed, and basically to waste time while they're doing other things.
Well, all right.
Hopping on the treadmill or doing other things. So try to be entertaining and inform them while you do this, because what we're trying to do is actively and hopefully creatively wasting your time.
Yes, right. And
that's why David has me on.
And if there's any possibility that somebody would say, I want to play my advertisement in the middle of this waste of time and I'll pay you $1 million, we'll talk. Give us a call. Shoot us an email. We'll do that. All right. Well, we'll continue wasting the time, and we can do it in a 2-minute block starting pretty much right now. We'll be back to waste more of it after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. Welcome back now to your source of news and information, apparently, allegedly, according to the polls, the Kagro in the Morning Show. And, we're a podcast of sorts. We're also a live stream. I keep forgetting that we actually should be referring to ourselves that way. That's hot, and the kids love it, or something. Okay, well, somehow we're a source of news and information. The real source of news and information.
Don't call it radio or records or.
Right. That would be ridiculous. The source of information is, in fact, the newspapers. We are reading newspapers. Skate keys. Rotary phones and phone booths. And okay.
So I found the Pew piece where all of this is from. Key takeaways: podcasts are popular. About half of Americans have listened to a podcast in the past year.
Not me.
And 1 in 5 of those listeners say they listen to a podcast nearly every day.
I think I know some of those people.
They turn to podcasts for entertainment, learning, and simply to have something to listen to while doing something else, like hopping on the treadmill.
Yes.
Or the elliptical. Comedy, entertainment, and politics are at the top of the list of topics that podcast listeners say they regularly listen to. We try to do all of those. Most podcast listeners say they hear news discussed on podcasts. However, just 1 in 5 say they listen to a podcast that's connected to a news organization. Well, we're good there. We are not connected to a news organization.
Uh-huh. We're not. We're not really connected to much of anything.
Right. Think about so, it. We try to stay grounded, but that doesn't mean that we're connected.
Right. If you'd like to connect us, let me know.
So what did I want to talk about? I wanted to talk about Ron DeSantis.
We're not even connected to ourselves.
A theme that we had talked about over the past 6 months or so that turns out is actually true.
All right.
He's a horrible person who doesn't know how to connect with people.
All right. Dun, 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 dun. That's it.
How did we know? Because we watched him.
Yes, in the boots.
We watched him try to talk to people. We watched him practicing kissing babies when he went to Iowa. It didn't go over well.
He ate them.
Right.
He ate bite out of them like an apple.
So here's, this is from a Politico Playbook. Donald Trump's Ron. It was supposed to be Ron DeSantis' big day on Capitol Hill, but Donald Trump managed to overshadow him from almost 1,000 miles away. In the 24 hours leading up to the Florida governor's much-anticipated meeting with GOP lawmakers, 2 members from his own state, John Rutherford and Greg Steube, endorsed Trump.
A
third Floridian, Brian Mast, who was once considered close with DeSantis, told CNN's Mel Zanona that he'll soon follow suit.
Okay.
And a few hours later, in a stone-cold act of political brutality, Representative Lance Gooden, Republican Texas, walked out of the DeSantis meeting and declared his support for Trump. To be fair, DeSantis notched a couple of small victories, but at the end of the day, Trump had picked up more endorsements from Florida than DeSantis did. Not only did lawmakers leave the DeSantis event without delivering their backing, our colleagues report
they weren't gonna.
Several tried to downplay their attendance, saying they went because the governor was a former colleague and they want to say hello.
Yes, there's that. And I mean, it's also not, I mean, I don't think they were motivated by this, but that's the wrong place to be doing this political work. You can't do it this way.
So we made some calls to find out what happened. It began over the weekend when Trump traveled to Nashville and attended a meeting arranged by Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee with most of the state's GOP congressional delegation. Trump and his team were pleasantly surprised to learn the delegation was ready and eager to endorse him, and they did. And that got Trump's people thinking, while he'd already received the endorsements of several prominent Florida Republicans, Trump's team wondered if others in the delegation might follow suit, just as DeSantis traveled to Capitol Hill. So on Sunday night, Trump officials sent emails to them asking if they wanted to do it, and they got, heck yes, I'd love to do it. And the amazing part was how easy it was, one person close to Trump said. That's because they all hate DeSantis.
Yeah. Because
and
of the former
Greg
colleague.
Steube, one of them, says basically it was awful. Steube told Playbook in a brief interview last night that DeSantis had never once reached out to him during his 5 years in Congress, didn't reply to his multiple attempts to connect. He recalled a recent news conference dealing with damage from Hurricane Ian when the governor's aides initially invited him to stand alongside DeSantis. He got there. They wouldn't let him participate.
All right. Good.
And, you know, by the way, he was injured in a tree trimming accident, and Trump called him, but DeSantis didn't. I mean, DeSantis, this is his own delegation.
All right.
He's doing absolutely no outreach whatsoever because he's Ron DeSantis. This is who he is.
He is, I don't know whether he's, you could describe him as, he behaves like somebody who describes himself as an introvert, like he's barely capable of doing.
He behaves like somebody who's on the spectrum.
Yeah. He does. And I mean, maybe he is, but he won't acknowledge it, and that would probably actually help him if he did, in a number of ways, politically and, personally. But, so instead he just looks like a weirdo. We'll all say he just is a weirdo who acts weird. If you would admit that, I struggle with issues on the spectrum.
There's nothing wrong with being on the spectrum. Some of my friends are. Maybe I am. I don't know. But I will tell you this. It is not necessarily retail politics that is your best job to figure when you go and you take those, say, well, what kind of job would suit me based on my, findings on this survey? Well, shaking hands and kissing babies isn't necessarily it. Yeah.
Now, I mean, it may be that his view of politics, I mean, it certainly looks this way, is more along like the lines of volcano lair and world domination.
Right. I mean, you got to have a little Ronald Reagan in you and smile when you stab people. He doesn't know how to do it.
That's the job. Well, he's lousy at it. And I mean, you would think that this would have ended his career earlier, but he really never should have won the governorship. That was an oddball one-off thing. But then it launches you, and now you're a contender because you're a governor. But he ran as I'll do the Trump thing here in Florida, and people were high on Trump at the time. And now he's got to run against Trump. And, what has he really got? I don't know.
When he's getting clobbered, most of the polls show Trump bubbling, 50 for Trump, 25 to DeSantis in any given poll at any given time.
Okay.
And Politico Playbook says the snub from GOP lawmakers in his home state is particularly striking, and it's playing into the narrative. Remember, narrative is important. That DeSantis is too aloof and too inattentive to the interpersonal niceties of big league politics.
Yeah.
That's a nice way of saying he's a damaged person who doesn't know how to relate to people.
Yeah, right. And now it might not be his fault, but it is. He has to own it, so there it is. It belongs to him. This is a trait of his. And, unless you have another explanation for it and you're willing to talk about it, the immediate one that will occur to political reporters is, you suck at this. So, there it is.
Right. There you have it.
Okay.
So let me give you a couple of Trump problems. DeSantis isn't the only one with problems.
All right.
This is Mike Murphy writing about Iowa. Mike Murphy is an ex-Republican operative who knows a lot of people in a lot of states based on his job. And he was there giving a lecture to something or other. And writes, Iowa is a big problem for Trump. Iowa Republicans aren't buying, and the math for the GOP caucus is going to be scrambled because the Democrats have killed theirs. Remember, the Democrats are not going with the Iowa caucus first anymore.
Right.
We got rid of that. Good. The conventional wisdom on 2024 is flipped again. At first, Trump was toast. Then DeSantis was a juggernaut. Then the New York indictment supercharged Trump. DeSantis is somebody who hates puppies, small children, and humankind in general. I mean, that's the narrative about him.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I like about the Bulwark. They don't pull any punches. Mike Murphy speaking here. DeSantis hates puppies and small children. I mean, that's just all there is to it. So now Trump, having turned the party of Lincoln into the party of Rasputin, cannot be defeated by any mortal Republican, only by Joe Biden. But I spent a few days in Iowa last week checking in with old friends from my decades working in state Republican politics. I was doing some actual reporting here. I had a useful captive audience of Iowa pals and operatives because I gave this lecture, and they told me Donald Trump's going to lose the Iowa caucus, and some of them predicted a third-place finish. Of any 10 strong Trump people I knew from 2016, half are gone. Iowa's GOP regulars think Trump is a certain loser against Biden, I was told, and the state's powerful evangelicals agree they're looking for a younger, more authentic champion.
All right. Nikki
They see the stakes as being so high in their war against the secular left that a slow general election pony like Trump seems a foolish bet. So that's what Iowa hacks are saying. And then let's look at the facts.
I just want to know what they're going to do instead.
Well, in 2016, Trump received 24.3% of the Republican caucus vote, leaving him second behind Ted Cruz. Now, anybody who finishes second behind Ted Cruz is not a juggernaut. I'm just saying.
Right. Just the regular knot.
Right. Somebody on Twitter said, Ron DeSantis is Ted Cruz without the personality. That is scary. So Ted Cruz wins, and Trump was second, and that's because of the evangelicals who dominate Republican Iowa. Trump received 45,000 votes out of about 187,000 votes cast. Now, what's happened is, because the Democratic caucus is gone, because it's not first in the nation anymore, people who want to participate in politics, people who want to do caucuses, because Iowa loves its caucus on a cold December, January night, whenever they do it.
But okay.
Those people who are independents or independent-leaning Democrat or Democratic, voters altogether, they can go participate in the Republican primary caucuses.
Can they? Okay.
All right. So a significant factor to consider when the DNC axed the Iowa caucuses, they left 172,000 Democrats and independents who participated in 2016 with nothing to do on caucus night.
Yeah. I mean,
local politicians in both parties will tell you never underestimate the importance of the caucus in Iowa's political culture. Participating is seen as an important civic duty. If there's only one, maybe they show up at the other one.
if they really do love caucuses, I guess we'll find out.
That's 172,000 voters.
Yeah.
And go back to the number.
They're all going to stand in one
got
corner.
45,000 votes.
Yeah.
They don't all have to go is the point. If 10% of them go, that's enough to change the calculus there.
It is. And it's weird. I mean, remember that the point of the caucus is you guys are going to have to go and stand in the corner with some supporter of some Republican. I mean, only briefly, I guess, and you don't have to say anything.
Yeah.
But
so the point where you can stand with your friends.
I wouldn't go. Yeah, I guess so.
Right? You all go together.
Yeah. You definitely want to try and do that.
175,000 of you go, chances are even Ron DeSantis could find somebody to talk to.
I guess so. Who do you vote for?
Not Ted Cruz,
we'll go
Ron
find out.
DeSantis could. So his point is Trump is damaged goods in Iowa. Now, he still might win.
All right.
Or he might lose, but take out whoever seems to be the front runner because he's good at that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mess for Republicans is the point. And that's why Iowa evangelicals figure Trump's going to lose to Biden.
Okay. I mean, they may be right.
Henry Olsen. He's not looking at Iowa. He's looking at New Hampshire. This New Hampshire poll shows DeSantis' path to defeating Trump.
DeSantis' path to be okay.
Most recent polls put former President Donald Trump well ahead in the 24 GOP presidential race. That's because he is. People like Michael A. Cohen, the writer, not Michael Cohen, the political operative, Speech Boy 71 on Twitter. But that doesn't mean the campaigns of his challengers are hopeless. In fact, a new poll of New Hampshire Republican primary voters shows there's still a path. Now, Michael Cohen figures it's over. Trump's already won. And that's probably true. And part of the reason is something that Sarah Longwell brings up. Sarah Longwell is on the Bulwark. She is a former Republican operative, an ever-Trumper. She does focus groups, and she's done many over the years. And she makes the point that people just haven't accepted the fact. People like Tim Scott, people like Chris Christie, that Republican voters do not want to go back to pre-2016. It's over. They're done with those kinds of politicians, and that's why Christie and Scott have no chance. Well, if only they would come with this other lane that isn't covered by Trump, maybe voters don't want it. They like where they are. They do not want to go back. So that's what Republican voters, and it's hard for us to understand because we don't understand why that's attractive, but it is to them.
Well, they got to stomp all over people for a couple
That's what
years.
they want.
Yeah.
And they're not interested in anybody who's not going to do that.
All right.
So this poll, which was conducted independent of any political campaign and provided exclusively to Henry Olsen, took place between April 2nd and 11 by political firm JL Partners. Right? If you're running for election, you get partners. They'll partner with you. It surveyed 623 likely GOP primary voters and used an innovative technique that included multiple modes of contacting respondents, including live calls, in-app texting. The partisan breakdown was 65% Republican, 35% independent. Trump leads the field with 51%, DeSantis winning 18%, and Sununu comes in at 10%. But when you give a one-on-one race with DeSantis, Trump's lead shrinks to 20 points or 53-33 with the remainder undecided. Now, I sometimes read Henry Olsen and say, what are you talking about? And here's one of those times. Right? Trump dominates, but when you do it in just this one way, holding it up to the light as if a one-on-one race with DeSantis is actually going to happen, which it won't because it's always going to be multiples, Trump only leads by 20 points. In other words, Trump is still in the lead. Big lead. And somehow or other, that's bad for Trump and good for DeSantis. He raised.
I mean, great. Finally.
Now, here's why. Here's why. He says, look, if you look at Trump's numbers, what happens is that Trump moves up 2 points when the field is narrowed to two people. And Olsen's point is that everybody who doesn't want to vote for Trump, the last time this happened in 2016, as people dropped out, they consolidated behind Trump. That's not happening this time. Whoever's for Trump is for Trump. That's it. He's not getting anybody else, which is something we say.
Yes. Are we
about
right?
the general election.
Oh.
None of these moves, like indictments, are good for Trump, scare quotes, in the sense that they're getting him more voters in the general election. His voters are his voters. He can go down. He can't go up. That's what Olson is saying here. Even if you winnow down the field to just 2 people, Trump doesn't pick those folks up.
All right.
He stays at 50, 52, 53. That's where he is. He's 53 if nobody runs against him. He's 53 if 80 people run against him. You know, that's who he is. Everybody else wants to do something else. Unfortunately for Olson's thesis, it's over 50.
Yes.
Which means he wins.
Right.
But
unless
that's
there's a lot
story.
more COVID.
DeSantis currently has not consolidated the support of GOP voters who want somebody else, but they are forced into a binary choice. If you do that, his support rises while Trump's remains stagnant. That's the opposite of what happened in 2016 when Trump's vote share increased substantially as more candidates dropped out. It's an interesting observation, which doesn't prove his point, but it's still an interesting observation.
All right. Well, I guess if you're in the interesting observation that doesn't prove anything business.
Well, it's too early, but it does, correlate with what we've been saying, which is to say Trump's got his voters and he's never going to win any extra voters to what he already has, which is not enough to win. It wasn't enough to win last time. If anything, he's got less.
And some of them will die before the general election. So
yeah, exactly right.
I mean, they will. Everyone else will too. But I mean,
so here's Sarah Longwell expanding on her point.
Okay.
You have to think of Trump's election as year 0. Because Republican voters say they don't want any part of a Republican Party that looks anything like it did before 2016. Okay, that just makes the point.
I see.
It's easy to identify people who don't realize the transformation undergone by GOP voters. Many of them, in fact, are Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, Chris Christie, Asa Hutchinson, Mike Pompeo.
Right. They're
BT. They're before Trump. They're living in an AT after Trump world.
They are.
Take Mike Pence, the OG of BT.
Yeah.
Voters tell me variously that the former vice president became too entrenched in the establishment. He alienated everybody. He's just a puppet and he doesn't have a spine.
Those are
all true,
things.
But really? They're saying it?
Yeah, all right. I mean, it's my feeling too.
As one voter put it, speaking for the group, a Pence presidency, quote, would just be a return to pre-2016, which is what the elite want. They want everything to go back to the way it was before Trump got elected, and that would be the wrong direction, end quote. Basically, the Republican Party has become QAnon. Yeah. And so they don't want to go back.
Right. Well, one, they might be held accountable if we went anywhere other than their reality.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess they probably do feel that way. And to the extent that Democrats want to campaign on returning to normalcy, maybe that's something to keep in mind. I mean, I don't know exactly how you handle it, and you don't have to satisfy those guys. Those guys aren't going to vote.
That's exactly right. You get everybody else. That's why they're considering Biden, even if they may not be enamored and thrilled with his age and other things about him.
All right.
So she says, consider the case of Ron DeSantis.
Oh, no.
He's the only viable challenger at the moment. He's remade Florida in his image, becoming America's premier culture warrior.
He made it round.
He's notable primarily for taking stands against vaccines, hiring quack doctors, yelling at college kids, demonizing gays and lesbians as pedophile groomers, making it illegal to discuss race in schools, attacking Disney's corporate status, shipping refugees to Martha's Vineyard. More than any other politician in America, DeSantis has labored to turn himself into a mini Trump. And what's DeSantis's big weakness? It's his BT political career. DeSantis was a normie mid-2010 Republican. He had a Tea Party credential, hawkish on Russia, member of the House Freedom Caucus, and he wanted to privatize Social Security. And Trump's already running against DeSantis with this BT record, calling him an establishment rhino in disguise who would gut Social Security and Medicare. And so, if Trump's attacks against DeSantis are working, Sarah Longwell says her focus group suggests that probably is the reason. I mean, you can't complain if you're a MAGA person that Ron DeSantis isn't cruel enough. You can't complain that he's not trying to stick it to the libs. Why are you not backing him? Because you think he can't win, except that's not how they decide who to vote for. But it may well could be that Trump is able to paint DeSantis as somebody who's like an old-style politician, like Christie, only meaner.
Yeah.
He is Ted Cruz.
Hmm.
And that's sticking with these voters, and I just find that fascinating.
Yeah. I think the pudding fingers is going to do it.
That'll do it. Now, there's a stark difference between DeSantis and the other potential candidates.
Yes.
But whatever happens from here on out, I suspect, says Sarah Longwell, that 2023 will be the year that puts the rest of you that the old days will return somehow. By the time his campaign hits New Hampshire, everybody in America, even the conservative think tank donors, will understand we aren't living through an interregnum. This is a new age. The question will be what AT Republican politics evolves into once everybody in the Republican Party understands this is the future and it's not going to be pretty. Mm-hmm. Point there are still people who cling to, I'm still a Republican because yada, yada, yada. These are the folks you push out. These are the folks that become independent.
Okay.
And once you're independent, you open the door to staying home, if not actually voting for Biden because, oh, my God, I can't do this again.
Mm. Right. Well, all right. Good, I think. I mean, this will be rough for all of you people, but...
yeah, but I'm over it.
You're not me, so what can I tell you?
Exactly.
So, sorry.
I feel for you. I really do.
Yeah. I have a lot of empathy. I'll be watching. You do this, not me. Okay. Well, yeah, that's true. They're never going to return. You're never going to get normal back. And, right. So the, you know, in legal and acceptable terms, you usually, have it right. You say you're just going to have to go out there and beat them at the polls and beat them badly. To the best you can hope for is that they lose enough that they give up and stop coming out the way they used to. That's the only return to normal you'll get. Is you could find that they just, you know, seethe in silence at home instead of politically organizing. But you're going to have to, if not, you're going to have to beat them and beat them soundly every time, everywhere. You can't rest.
Right. Now, I don't have a specific item to link to give you this, but in the remaining minutes I have in this 20-minute segment, what I'd like to do is talk about patience and uncertainty.
All right.
Right. So you got to be patient with Fani Willis. She hasn't done her thing yet. Jack Smith, the federal prosecutor, hasn't done his thing yet. The hopefully last witness for the Proud Boys trial, Dominic Pizzola, is getting cross-examined today, and then we'll see what happens with that. That'll take a while to finish, but we're getting to the beginning of the end there. And there's other things that are happening. We have to wait on Alvin Bragg because December is when we start again. Next week is when the next Trump trial starts. That's the one about the Jean Carroll rape charges.
Yeah, okay.
And another thing we have to wait on with uncertainty is Dianne Feinstein's retirement.
Yes.
We don't really know what's happening here. And here's the interesting thing, and this is a process thing. It's Senate, so I don't expect you to have all the answers here. But we know
Joan does.
That if Chuck Schumer wants to replace her, even temporarily, on the Senate Judiciary Committee, he needs the approval of the Republicans to do it. He doesn't have them, so that's not happening. Yeah. Question on the table is if she, in fact, sees the writing on the wall, or her staff does, and she retires, can they fill that position in judiciary? Can the Republicans still block it?
Yes. It's the same play. Nothing changes.
Nothing changes.
The
so
dynamics,
if nothing changes, what's the rush to force her to retire? And I think that's part of what people like Christian Gillibrand were thinking when they say, well, you know, you got to give her a chance and let her decide.
Yeah.
Because in the end, if it doesn't really matter, keep your powder dry.
I guess, the only thing I can think of is that it might change the dynamics of the way the public understands the issue. This idea of, I mean, this is an unusual thing to say, well, I'm not going to resign and retire. I'm just going to do less. And why don't we just swap in somebody else to do my job? It's not done.
That doesn't make a lot of sense to the public. But if you retire and they don't
Right.
fill the position.
Yeah, then it's right.
It's like Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court.
Right. You retire, a new senator comes in. Senators
then there's all sorts of pressure on them to get rid of blue slips and change the rules and nuke the 60 vote requirement and all sorts of stuff that'll get people agitated that may or may not be a good idea and may or may not happen.
Yeah. So there's two ways that could go. One, that could be very, if you are willing to do it, that could be very energizing for Democrats to get them to the polls. On the other hand, as you were listing off the topics of the things that they would need to do in order to make things work again, you begin to see, maybe actually the majority of Senate Democrats don't really want to do that heavy lifting.
Manchin
for whatever
certainly
reason.
doesn't, and Sinema certainly doesn't.
Yeah,
so where does that leave you?
Right. And so everybody else says, well, I don't really want the headache of banging my head against the wall trying to get Manchin and Sinema on board.
Right.
Or I never liked the idea in the first place, but I'll blame it on Manchin and Sinema, depending on how cynical you are.
Right, like Dick Durbin. So the point is, don't get too excited about this. There's a lot that's not going to change because it's the Senate, and here's one of the reasons why.
Yeah. Well, that brings
things can change, as you well know. You know, you have been an advocate of change. Change sometimes takes a long time, but it still changes. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, this probably isn't the issue that's going to make things change. Oh, by the way, that committee cannot subpoena Clarence Thomas without a majority.
Oh, well. Yeah, well, they still kind of sort of have a majority if they get everybody together every time.
It's a tie.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, I thought that they had a 2-seat advantage to themselves on that.
I have to check on that, but I don't think they do. And this is not one of those things where the vice president gets to break the tie.
Right, not in a committee. So, yeah, and I mean, there'd be more things standing in the way of subpoenaing Clarence Thomas than just that. Like, for instance, him saying, "What? No way. I'm not coming." And then what do you do, right? Like, you know how it is with contempt of Congress. You bring the case to where? To court. Well, who's the head of this whole court thingy that they got going on?
Yeah, it'll probably be brought to that district where Clarence Thomas oversees it, But the thing is, everybody says, well, why don't they just? Well, if you dig into a little bit, they just can't.
Yeah, it's a little complex. I don't know that they were going to subpoena and actually get testimony from Clarence Thomas anytime soon. That would actually be a fairly major issue constitutionally, and who gets to interpret that stuff. And even if they think that Clarence Thomas was wrong over there on the Supreme Court, they don't like the idea. We don't want to set a precedent, and we're in that business of subpoenaing Supreme Court justices.
Well, right, governance is complicated, and that's why Kevin McCarthy's bad at his job.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Where the hell are we again? Yes, Netroots Radio. That's right. Shall we continue with our show at all? Really, honestly, or our roundup, or what other things have we to share with you? I have this piece referred to my attention via Mastodon, and comes from the mighty OCD, who expressed such satisfaction that I read his suggestion yesterday that I feel like why not read another one today? Although there's some additional commentary that came along the way here that I missed until right now. But I guess talking about everything. Let's see. One, a question of who did the Dems have to run against? I imagine you meant DeSantis in Florida next time. You wrote Santos, which is an interesting Freudian slip, I suppose. Will Santos ever run? So assume Santos, who did Dems have to run against Santos in Florida? Was Santos? I mean, maybe I missed something. Was there a development here? Has George Santos talked about moving to Florida and running for governor there, or seeking a seat in Congress from Florida? Maybe Florida man will vote for me if no one in New York will. I don't know. Then a comment on what I think I recognize as the unwillingness of Republicans the Republican base to return to pre-Trump normal politics, which I assume is the root of this comment. They don't want to put the mask back on. That's basically it. Not the COVID mask, that too, but also just, they don't want to have to pretend to be a part of mainstream thought where it's not okay to be openly racist, anti-Semitic, fascistic, authoritarian, et cetera, et cetera. And I agree that they've enjoyed that too much to go back. I think that's a good point and something to keep in mind. All right. Now, as far as the article that he was pointing to, it was Greg Sargent's piece in the Washington Post about about everything, really. But Kevin McCarthy is the subject here. Kevin McCarthy is botching MAGA's top issue, which I don't even know if I know for sure offhand what he thinks that top issue is. But, it looks like it might be border security. And then it says, step up, Democrats. And I think that probably is a good prompting for Democrats on all of the issues that Kevin McCarthy is botching. Despite the fact that it might be a good idea to step up, I note that in many cases the instinct will be not to. Well, when you're, the old adage, when your enemy is blah, 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 whatever the hell the enemy is supposed to be doing, where you're supposed to let them do it. They're going to try and do that in many cases, as opposed to stepping in and filling the void, which is what I think the big oncoming new majority of the Democratic base is going to want to see. I think they want to see action and fight. And since the Republicans aren't going to go back to pre-Trump politics, we're going to have to get a lot tougher. And there's a lot of people, members of the Democratic voting base, that enjoy seeing it when it happens. But that's another story. And we have this one. Right, so let's see. Kevin McCarthy botching MAGA's top issue. Step up, Democrats, admonishes Greg Sargent. And in longer way of saying it, it goes this way. Republicans spent enormous sums on campaign ads in 2022, depicting migrants as in the most demeaning terms imaginable. Then, after winning the House, they rolled out a border security only bill that and border security enclosed in scare quotes there. Border security only that would treat asylum seekers as the menacing invaders depicted in those ads. Seems fairly predictable, right? The idea was to wall them out and do nothing more, which, by the way, only works for so long. Eventually, they just overwhelm the walls. I mean, the forces driving people to migrate are one, life and death, and two, only going to get worse, and three, only going to affect more and more people and cause them to face that same decision as time goes on. And eventually it's going to be, well, you're either going to have to wall them out and then try to, shoot them on their approach to the wall, and it'll just be a humanitarian nightmare, and we'll lose all moral standing of any kind anywhere. And not only lose moral standing, but probably find ourselves on the receiving end of some shooting and bombing as well, as the rest of the world realizes, no, this isn't what we want to see happening, and the humanitarian crisis you're creating cries out for intervention by the rest of humanity. And we'll be like, I don't understand why people are bombing Americans. Americans are the ones that do the bombing. We're right in all of this. How could we be wrong all of a sudden? And it'll be enormously troublesome for us, I would say. But the other alternative, of course, is to see that there's just no way. There's no wall. There's no police force. There's no, army that can hold back millions and even billions of people who are escaping, flooding, famine, whatever else, whatever other climate disaster has struck their homeland and made it impossible for them to survive there. It's either try to defeat Donald Trump's stupid wall and possibly live, or stay where we are and die for sure. You don't have to be a psychologist to figure out what choice is going to be made there. And then you don't have to be a mathematician to add up the numbers and say, we don't have the ability to stop it. So either prepare for it or pretend you really don't understand and wish that you did have the ability to stop it, and then fail and lose even bigger because you also haven't prepared for what happens after you can't stop them anymore. So, I mean, but then if logic worked, we'd be in another world. Anyway, oh yes, right, Greg Sargent. He had organized thoughts about something, and I wanted to express them to you. Many months later, the House GOP border bill is mired in Republican infighting, like their other top issue, the debt ceiling. Swing district lawmakers have balked at its harsh handling of those seeking asylum. Okay. It turns out that basing real-world policy on the lurid fantasy universe depicted in MAGA-pleasing ads produces results so absurd and extreme that Republicans beholden to less MAGA-fied voters can't stomach it. That's the problem in miniature. You're going to have to mount machine guns on the wall and just fire like crazy blindly into the crowd and killing men, women, and children fleeing climate disaster of your making, by the way, on television in front of the rest of the world in order to have any chance at even briefly staving off the defeat you were worried about. And then, by the way, the people who do reach the other side of the wall after coming through a hail of machine gun fire too, probably not going to be that interested in, just quietly then settling into lives of, paid servitude and then paying their taxes and being happy to be here. They might get across and want to slaughter you. I don't know. But chances of their wanting to get across and slaughter you, I think, are diminished if you don't start shooting at them when they're trying to save their children. Okay, just a thought. Anyway, Republicans, of course, will take the clip of this and say, even the Democrats admit that they want to come over here and slaughter you. Well, you're making it worse by doing what you're doing. It's certainly more likely that they'll want to do that than it would be if we said, well, life is tough over here. We can't just give away everything, but I guess we won't shoot you, but you'll have to climb the wall. Well, that's on you. I don't know. Maybe just don't make it so difficult on them. Anyway, as he's saying, it turns out that basing real-world policy on the lurid fantasy, or doing the why don't you just-ism option, right, turns out that it produces terrible results that are so bad that Republicans who aren't in overwhelmingly MAGA-fied districts can't stomach it. Democrats should be capitalizing on this GOP disarray, need a word for that, by doing more to push their own immigration reform agenda. Unfortunately, they are at risk of squandering this moment. Oh no, I can't believe it. How would that ever happen? And part of the blame falls on President Biden. Womp womp. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and GOP leaders had planned to pass their border bill in January, but that idea got shelved when objections from more moderate Republicans caught them off guard. They don't talk to moderate Republicans, so they don't know. The sticking point is that the GOP bill would functionally end asylum seeking entirely. Republicans are now negotiating to soften this language because, as Politico reports, those objecting fear the bill's treatment of asylum seekers will, quote, alienate voters back home and or armies around the world eventually. All this is a major rebuke to the MAGA worldview. As President Donald Trump treated migrants as little more than a scourge to be handled with maximal harshness. The most MAGA faithful GOP candidates in 2022 embraced this notion. Many lost, but Republicans have still vowed that a GOP House must, quote, secure the border, whatever that means, with zero compromises on, quote, amnesty, meaning no moves to allow more migrants to live and work here. Yet moderate Republicans are insisting on more humane treatment of migrants. Some of them, such as Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina, have declared the border-only bill a non-starter, calling for allowing more migrants to work here legally. Republicans may well pass something in the end, but they are asking moderates to cast a difficult vote for a bill knowing it will never become law. Democrats should increase pressure on GOP moderates by getting behind a comprehensive alternative in a more concerted way. In rough outlines, this approach would combine a large increase in money to speed processing of asylum seekers at the border, combined with expedited processes for removing those who don't qualify. That would potentially give Republicans what they say they want, reducing incentives for migrants to apply for asylum solely to disappear into the interior while awaiting hearings. This approach would also include new channels for migrants to work legally, which those moderate Republicans such as Mace also say they want, and it would include legalization for groups such as the Dreamers brought here as children, farm workers, and others, and another thing some moderate Republicans can countenance. Democrats should seize the opportunity to clearly lay out a real plan, Kerry Talbot of the Immigration Hub told me. But let's see, some Democrats get this, and of course they have been offering these plans all along. That's how you know they get this. Senator Robert Menendez, for instance, I guess, just proposed a package along those lines. He also calls on Biden to implement an idea I've suggested, that is Greg Sargent, using parole authority to admit more migrant workers matched to states that need them. Even some GOP governors are declaring that need, and they'd get to fly them to those states, just like the Martha's Vineyard stunt, except they'd fly them to somewhere there where they would be wanted and useful, and a place that's capable of absorbing them and can prepare and actually do it. What would be wrong with that? Well, of course, in Ron DeSantis' mind, it's not cruel, so therefore it's not worth doing. Meanwhile, the pro-immigration group Forward, like FWD, forward, I guess, FWD.US, they've got to be a .US, and I got to read it that way, that's what it says, has released a blueprint combining those ideas into a broader agenda. The principle here is that opening up more legal pathways is the way to reduce pressure on the border while also honoring pro-immigrant values and international commitments. But this push is being hindered by the Biden administration's approach to the border. With a spike in migration expected once a COVID-19 limit on asylum seeking lifts in May, Biden seems to have decided that only severe limits on applications at the border can manage logistical problems there, and worse, mitigate his political problem as well. To his credit, Biden has expanded pathways for 30,000 migrants per month to apply from abroad for protection, but he has combined this with limits on who can apply at the border that are quite draconian. The Biden vision seeks to encourage migrants to stop making the trek to the border and apply from afar instead. That's an understandable goal, but in practice, Biden's disincentives to make the trek renege on fundamental human rights commitments to those seeking refuge here. Biden's basic posture makes it harder for Democrats to loudly stand for the idea that the border can be managed without a dramatic reneging on these core commitments. The tragedy of the situation is that we know what this would look like, and it could get bipartisan support. Such a package, of course, could never pass the House, but this leads to the ultimate point. A large faction of Republicans will never support reforms that make the asylum system actually work and allow more migrants to work here in a sane and orderly way. That's because they don't want more immigrants in the United States. They want fewer. Republicans are struggling to build a real agenda around that goal because it's fundamentally unworkable, and even as some Republicans recognize it's bad for the country. Presenting the Democratic alternative now would split the GOP coalition and send a clearer message on what the Democratic Party stands for than the muddled message Biden has sent thus far. And the only answer to that is, sounds good, but that's still a maybe. I don't know what to tell you. Right? Presenting the Democratic alternative now would split the GOP coalition and send a clearer message. It might, it should, but it also might not. Just because they're kind of dumb and crazy and politics is weird and unpredictable. So we should at least acknowledge it's a guess. It's a good guess, but it's a guess. All right, let's see. Other things to include in today's roundup. One update, no, Mighty OCD hadn't had his coffee yet, and he meant to say DeSantis, not Santos, although that really would be a terrific next chapter in the story. He has some Florida ties, right? He's a Florida guy in every sense, but actually claiming to be from Florida. Why not go ahead and do that too? All right, let's see. Other things to bring you. There's an awful lot. As a follow-up to the post I started to read you, and maybe I should just go there, and just to give credit where credit is due, I was reading from the Substack blog, I don't know what, right, of Molly Conger, or Conger, and I didn't bother to figure out what the actual pronunciation of the name was, and I'm sorry to Molly, because this is great. Heads Up reporting Burning Hate, which is the piece she wrote at The Devil's Advocates, which, what will it tell us if I click on the About? It's an independent publication, launched in April of this year. So that's like right now. So maybe this is one of the first pieces by Molly herself. And it's so it seems sort of Substacky, newslettery-ish. And I was reading you this, and now there's a Washington Post follow-up piece on it, which, would probably make the point just as well and more briefly. But I don't know. I mean, I thought this was a great spot by Molly here, so I kind of want to read her piece on it. Reminder from yesterday, this was the fact that there's no statute of limitations on felonies in Virginia, and there's one particular part of the penal code which tells us that burning an object on the property of another or on a highway or any other public place with intent to intimidate is a felony and carries a penalty. And, there was the A and B sections of that. Any person with the intent of intimidating any other person or group of persons burns an object on private property of another without permission is guilty of the Class 6 felony. And any person who, with the intent of intimidating any other person or group or persons, burns an object on a highway or other public place in a manner having a direct tendency to place another person in reasonable fear or apprehension of death or bodily injury is guilty of a Class 6 felony. I know it's complicated, but you needed to hear it. So, where were we yesterday? We just began reading it. So I guess we'll just start over. On August 11th, 2017, hundreds of torch-bearing marchers, fire, right, traversed the grounds of the University of Virginia. Say either private property or a public place. I'm not sure which, but it's one or the other. They'd come to Charlottesville from across the country, taking Friday morning flights or taking turns at the wheel for cross-country drives in rented vans with guys they met on message boards. Very normal. Arriving early before the big event the following morning. They gathered at Nameless Field. That's what they call it. It is described here, parenthetically, as a grassy acre near the UVA tennis courts with a deceptive name. It is deceptive because, of course, that's the name. But, all right. Anyway, and they there distributed tiki torches. Men with walkie-talkies clipped to their belts. Cool, tactical. Some with wired earpieces. Cooler, more tactical. Barked orders. Elliot Klein, an ambitious young white nationalist organizer, which is interesting. I mean, he's not ambitious if he wants to be in the mainstream, but I guess he doesn't. An ambitious young white nationalist organizer calling himself Eli Mosley after 20th century British fascist Oswald Mosley, shouted at the crowd as they formed into a line, "We're picking big guys, no females." Klein and his security team would be selecting the biggest marchers to lay down their torches and keep the perimeter as the march moved through the university grounds. They might need their hands free, for fighting. The march wound its way through the grounds, up the lawn, then up the steps of the University of Virginia's iconic rotunda. On the other side of the rotunda, gathered near the statue of Thomas Jefferson, a small group of anti-racist activists waited. In her testimony during a later civil trial, one of the women who was terrorized that night said, "When we heard the roaring of the approaching crowd, we just linked arms and held hands and started to sing. She said at first it sounded like thunder, like the earth was growling. As they grew closer, but before she could see the light of the torches, she began to make out the chants. Hundreds of voices raised in unison, shouting, "Blood and soil." It's so... well, whatever. Testifying about that night 4 years later, she said she still heard it in her nightmares. And by the time the small group of mostly students realized the magnitude and ferocity of the approaching mob, it was too late. They were surrounded at the base of the statue by hundreds of torch-wielding white supremacists. For just a few minutes that those trapped at the base of the statue said they believed might be their last, as they were doused in lighter fluid. And remember, people are standing around them with open flames. Doused in lighter fluid, maced and punched. For those few minutes, there was a melee. The police made no move to intervene, as streams of pepper spray were let loose, and screams of "medic" were audible above the roar of "you will not replace us." When the trapped counter-protesters were finally able to flee, stumbling blindly with burning eyes and covering their heads in a hailstorm of fists and torches, the marchers declared victory. Richard Spencer, an organizer of that weekend's rally, climbed the base of the statue and delivered a victory speech to the still roaring crowd, now shouting, "Hail victory! Hail Spencer!" That's gone nowhere, by the way. As Spencer told them, "We occupy this ground. We won." The marchers dispersed to their various hotels, campgrounds, and Airbnbs. Spencer claims, by the way, he booked his under the pseudonym, quote, "literally Hitler." Wow. So someone actually decided they would rent to that person. They had to rest up for the real battle in the morning. While they slept, a young man from Ohio was driving through the night, perhaps already knowing his gray Dodge Challenger would be impounded as a murder weapon before he slept again. He checked Twitter and retweeted a post. David Duke had tweeted images of the Torch March, celebrating the alt-right's success that evening with the caption, "Our people on the march. Will you be at the #UniteTheRight tomorrow?" Before he left Ohio that evening, his mother texted him, quote, "Be careful." And James Alex Fields, in one of his last texts before a lifetime behind bars, replied to his mother with a photograph of Adolf Hitler, great, and the words, "We're not the ones who need to be careful." Okay, that probably didn't help you at trial. 5.5 years later, the word Charlottesville has become synonymous with those two fused images, Fields' mangled Challenger and an iconic photo of the crowd, torches in hand, the rotunda at their backs. Fields was convicted both in state and federal court of Heather Heyer's murder and multiple counts of aggravated malicious wounding. Daniel Borden, Alex Ramos, Jacob Goodwin, and Tyler Watkins went away for a brutal gang beating of a young black man. Richard Preston, an imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, did some time for discharging his firearm in the general direction of another young black man after shouting, "Die, N-word." But all in all, for all the violence of both days, there was a curious reluctance to bring charges for anything that didn't rise to the level of attempted murder. There are thousands of photographs, video from every conceivable angle, taken by victims, bystanders, professional photojournalists, and even the marchers themselves. Their faces are uncovered. Their motives are clear. The law is fairly straightforward. But the University of Virginia lies within the jurisdiction of Albemarle County. In 2017, Albemarle County Commonwealth's attorney Robert Tracci, T-R-A-C-C-I, Tracci, I don't know how he says it, chose not to bring any burning objects cases under this provision, Section 18.2-423. He didn't think he could make a case against the Tiki Torch mob. All right. I mean, it's a conclusion. Now, the Commonwealth's attorney for Charlottesville at the time, Dave Chapman, wrote in a memo in October of that year that he believed the cases could be made, but the UVA cases weren't his to prosecute. And I guess this is a screen grab of the memo. is laid out here. Do you want to hear it? I mean, it's kind of dense, but the following examples may present circumstances in which law enforcement would be on firm ground in prosecuting a case pursuant to that section, particularly 18.2-423.01b, I guess the second part, the public place, with an intent to intimidate. It might be possible under circumstances in which a person or group of people are gathered peacefully, perhaps demonstrating on behalf of a cause in a public park, and they are beset upon by a group of torch-bearing individuals who approach them and physically surround them or crowd them closely while expressing a contrary message. It might be possible under circumstances in which a group of people respond to oppose, for example, an alt-right gathering at a public monument, where the alt-right demonstrators are bearing torches and begin to use them in a menacing way towards those who have gathered to oppose them. And it might be possible under circumstances in which torch-bearing alt-right attendees leave from a public monument where they have gathered with torches and proceed to the location of a nearby synagogue, especially while chanting anti-Semitic slogans. The first two examples, he says in his memo, might be reflected in the events in front of the rotunda at the university on August 11th, when torch-bearing members of the alt-right became involved in a confrontation with counter-demonstrators and presented a threat to them by being armed with menacing devices that were also a symbol of their views. What about that third example? Well, we'll return to that in the rest of the article after this.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. By the way, I have seen the message on the KITM hashtag over at the Bird site. Ricky the Kanakistani tells us, by the way, she says, I was listening to you this morning while in the shower, which, I would think there's a risk of electric shock at that, but I assume you can play it on speakers outside of the shower or on shower-safe speakers. They have such things. I see them advertised all the time. And I personally, I think would need to escape. Well, certainly my own podcast. If they were playing that in the shower, that would be kind of weird. But at any rate, listening in the shower. So it seems that, quote, the idea that, quote, people listen to podcasts while doing other things certainly checks out. Okay. Good to know. We fit into people's lives in various ways. All right. Just wanted to throw that out there and just let you know I was watching. Now back to this article by Molly Conger here. The balance of the screen grab of the Dave Chapman memo is, well, not that informative, really. I think we got to the bulk of it. But you see how he's laying out how a case could be made on this. The third example that he had provided was one in which the people with the torches proceeded to the location of a nearby synagogue. Not exactly what went on. It says here the third example might be reflected, though, in the events of August 11th at a church nearby the rotunda, where interested citizens gathered to listen to a speaker and later felt trapped inside and at risk of harm from torch-bearing demonstrators outside who encircled the church to some material degree. Now, how you move from, well, it's a synagogue. No, it isn't a synagogue. It's a church. And I understand anti-Semitic slogans will be offensive to all, but it's not quite the same thing as surrounding a synagogue and chanting anti-Semitic slogans. But anyway, it goes on, though, to say in the screen grab here that this section of the law may have utility for law enforcement on occasion, but its application is limited to narrow circumstances, although the argument is they've been met here. It is not enough that people feel a general threat, even a completely understandable and justified feeling from the extreme and repugnant message or ideology expressed by torch-bearing demonstrators. There must be specific circumstances that would cause people who are then and there present to have a legitimate and immediate fear of death or bodily harm. And interestingly enough, that's probably that's the responsible approach to the application of the law. I just wanted to throw out the distinct possibility that putting the law in the hands of others, the fascists, the pro-Trump, MAGA types, etc., they are the sorts who love to, look at the statute with a layman's eye and try and imagine how it could be usable against their enemies. And that's how we arrive at things like interpretations of self-defense laws, castle doctrine, stand your ground laws, etc., where all you have to do, literally all you have to do is speak the magic words aloud that I was in fear for my life, and that's the end of the question. I just kind of want to point that out, that responsible people actually say, well, now you really have to, be right about that, and provably so. Anyway, back to the body of the article. Molly reminds us that in Virginia, prosecutors come and go, as they do everywhere, but felony lives forever. In an October 2019 debate between then sitting prosecutor Tracci and his challenger, Jim Hingley, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's Hingley, Gley. Okay, I mangled it, but okay. Jim Hingley. Tracci again scoffed at the idea of indicting these cases, saying Hingley's belief that it was even possible was a sign that he was inexperienced and wrong for the job. Months later, in November 2019, Hingley won the election. Now it seems he's trying to make good on his campaign promise of proving Robert Tracci wrong. In February of 2023, the Albemarle County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office quietly sought and got indictments under the Burning Objects statute. A grand jury agreed with Hingley. There was probable cause to believe that objects had been burned with the intent to intimidate. Fugitive warrants were issued. Arrests were made by local police in far-ranging jurisdictions. Now, nearly 6 years after that hot night in August, the extraditions are starting. Over the coming days and weeks, that is Molly, will share with you the stories of the men who carried torches that night. I don't know how much of it I want to hear, but okay. Some of them are now facing felony charges in Albemarle County. That's the part I want to hear. Others may come to share that fate. After the crowd dispersed that night, after the deadly rally the next morning, those men went home. Some started businesses. Some died. Some trafficked drugs, beat their wives, and choked their girlfriends. Went to grad school, went to prison, started families, ran for office, left the movement, tried to lead the movement, or just tried to disappear. There are as many stories as there were flames in the night, when their voices joined as one, shouting, "Jews will not replace us," then going their separate ways, back to the communities they came from, and now some of them are on their way back here, this time against their will. And there's an author's note here. These stories are ugly. There will be images of violence and audio of hateful language. There is a need to lay bare those who these men are and what they are responsible for. But there is a duty not to choose the most sensational images for shock value, to allow ourselves to seek out the most extreme transgressions for the mere thrill of experiencing it vicariously, or to lift up and spread radicalizing propaganda. And there is a duty to the victims of this particular night of violence and to everyone who has lived in fear of what it symbolized, a duty to be honest with them. but not to exploit their pain. There is no clear line to walk between showing the truth of something vile and showing too much of it, and in my work, I have strived to shine a light into the dark to drive out that darkness, not to put a spotlight on the monsters that lurk within. But these are the stories of individual men, of individual moments, making the choices that ended in violence. And then finally, take care of yourselves and each other. It's all we really have. So it will be interesting to read on in some of these stories, and I guess some of them are already printed and available here for review. But I just wanted to let you know, one, that Molly was the first one to bring it to my attention that this was even a possibility. And now, I don't think I'll read through the entirety of it, but I note for the record that the Washington Post has this headline reported yesterday by Salvador Rizzo. Grand jury indicts torch carriers in 2017 Charlottesville rally. So, there you have it. A little bit of the story, at least. At least 3 men who marched with blazing tiki torches at the 2017 white supremacist rally in Charlottesville are now facing criminal charges, according to indictments unsealed this week. A grand jury in Virginia indicted multiple individuals who carried torches at the Unite the Right rally in August of 2017. Albemarle County Commonwealth's attorney James Hingley said in a statement. Indictments had been unsealed Tuesday for 3 defendants who were extradited from their home states. Tyler Bradley Dykes of Bluffton, South Carolina, Dallas Medina of Ravenna, Ohio, and Will Zachary Smith of Nocona, Texas. Officials said additional indictments remain under seal. Prosecutors allege the torch carriers violated a rarely enforced criminal statute, which makes it a crime to burn objects with intent to intimidate when they marched around the University of Virginia campus on August 11, 2017, while chanting, "You will not replace us," and "Jews will not replace us," and the Nazi slogan, "Blood and Soil." The Charlottesville white supremacist rally turned deadly the next day, as you know. They go over the statute a little bit here. Let's see, a UVA law school professor comments on things. You have to show that the conduct created a reasonable apprehension of death or bodily harm. There's very strong evidence that these folks were here for the purpose of terrifying our Jewish friends and neighbors and people of color. That's true. The law was enacted in 2002, partly in response to the Ku Klux Klan, which was known for burning crosses in public to scare the black population. It is tailor-made for a criminal case against the torch carriers at the rally, Professor Coughlin said. But the case took nearly 6 years to get to the grand jury. Hingley's predecessor, former Albemarle County Commonwealth's attorney Robert Tracci, declined to seek charges against the torch carriers. He wrote an opinion article from 2019 that under the Virginia law on burning objects, the question could arise, and would in criminal law, as to whether a burning torch falls within the definitional scope of burning an object. Tracci could not be reached for comment Tuesday, but Coughlin notes he was voted out of office. The voters replaced him. And one of Jim Hingley's promises, if you look at his campaign material, he said that he thought these charges should be brought. Well, now they are. So there you go. And I guess he's right. Tracci has a point, and it'll be interesting to see how it's settled. But once it's settled, it will, I think, answer the question. And the question being, if it was written with the idea in mind of burning an object, meaning setting a cross or something else on fire so that it burns, like on the one hand, well, okay, you could get really super technical and say, well, the thing that you're lighting on fire has to be consumed by the flames, and tiki torches are not. But it doesn't say that anywhere. It just says burning an object with the intent of intimidating. And it doesn't say burn a cross, because if you said burn a cross, then they would burn something else and intimidate them that way and say, it's not a cross. You can't get us in this. It says burning an object. I mean, the tiki torch itself isn't consumed by the flames. But I mean, if you want to get that technical, the fuel is the fuel not an object? Was it not burned with the intent to intimidate? That is absolutely true. It would be impossible not to believe that. So the question is tiki torch fuel the object that they had in mind? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, the ordinary use of a tiki torch is not to intimidate, but the use in this example, it clearly was to intimidate. They easily could have marched and shouted with flashlights or nothing or glow bracelets, but somehow that wasn't as intimidating as torches. So, once they answer that in the affirmative, and I guess the grand jury says there's a reasonable chance that you will, Tracci's just going to end up looking like a complacent idiot. That was unfortunate. All right, switching topics. Let's see where to go next. I've got another entry from Rosalind McGregor, although I think I'm going to hold on to it for perhaps later in the week and make better use of it then. I want to try and run through a couple of other things here that are of some interest and point us in a different direction. Here's one that's in a totally different direction. Why not throw this one out there? Because it's foreign news, but important, obviously, and we want to keep an eye on it. Is another weird thing that the Russians are up to that you say, oh yeah, we should be on the lookout for that. Watch out. How are we going to deal with that? They're very good red teamers, the Russians, I must say. They find great ways of breaking the rules and the norms and disrupting things that make us say, but why would who would have imagined? Here's the next thing. Ready? This from the BBC. State-sponsored media, of course, if you believe Elon Musk. Ukraine war, the Russian ships accused of North Sea sabotage. What is happening here? Gordon Correra is the security correspondent for BBC News who wrote this piece. Russia has a program, which they spell funny, to sabotage wind farms and communication cables in the North Sea, according to new allegations. And as soon as you say it, you think, sure, of course, why wouldn't they do something like that? The details come from a joint investigation by public broadcasters, in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And so I guess you're not going to be allowed to hear about this on Twitter because those are, of course, state-sponsored media. It says Russia has a fleet of vessels disguised as fishing trawlers and research vessels in the North Sea. They carry underwater surveillance equipment and are mapping key sites for possible sabotage. So it seems the tenor of the article changes a little bit here. Possible sabotage. Actual sabotage yet? I guess maybe they don't have evidence of that just yet, but possible sabotage. But you want to get to it while it's still only possible and not actual sabotage. But you know how we are here in the West, needing evidence of things. Anyway, the BBC understands that UK officials are aware of Russian vessels moving around UK waters as part of the program. The first in a series of reports is due to be broadcast on Wednesday, that's today, by DR in Denmark, NRK in Norway, SVT in Sweden, and YLE, is that right? YLE, though they in Finland. I'll note for the record that it's all capitals, so that they appear to stand for something. The state public radio programs, but the Finnish one is in lowercase, capital Y, but then LE lowercase. I don't know what's going on in Finland, but their language, hey, it's wacky. Anyway, a Danish counterintelligence officer says the sabotage plans are being prepared in case of a full conflict with the West, while the head of Norwegian intelligence told the broadcasters the program was considered highly important for Russia and controlled directly from Moscow. The broadcasters say they have analyzed intercepted Russian communications which indicate so-called ghost ships sailing in Nordic waters which have turned off their transmitters so as not to reveal their locations. That's kind of strange all by itself. The report focuses on a Russian vessel called the Admiral Vladimirsky. Officially, this is an expeditionary oceanographic ship or underwater research vessel, but the report alleges that it is in fact a Russian spy ship. The documentary uses an anonymous former UK Royal Navy expert to track the movements of the vessel in the vicinity of 7 wind farms off the coast of the UK and the Netherlands in one mission. The Admiral, and here's a map here, the Admiral Vladimirsky passed several offshore wind farms. And if you take a look at the map, I mean, I guess if you didn't put the wind farm locations on there, you'd say, I don't know, that looks like maybe a normal-ish route for a boat to take. But when you note where the wind farms are, I guess, it looks pretty damning there instead. It says, the report says, the vessel slows down when it approaches areas where there are wind farms and loiters in the area. It says it sailed for a month with its transmitter turned off. When a reporter approached the ship on a small boat, he was confronted by a masked individual carrying what appeared to be a military assault rifle. So maybe not research. Unless they're saying, oh, we're afraid of the infamous North Sea pirates. The same ship was reportedly sighted off the Scottish coast last year. It was spotted entering the Moray Firth on November 10th and seen about 30 nautical miles east of Lossiemouth. Lossiemouth, maybe? It's spelled like Lossy Mouth, but Lossiemouth. Home to the RAF's Maritime Patrol Aircraft Fleet before heading slowly west. The BBC understands that UK officials are aware of Russian intent to conduct what is known as undersea mapping, including using boats that move around in UK waters. If there are specific threats against the UK, these would be investigated, but sources declined to say what activity might have been looked at so far. In February, Dutch intelligence issued an unusual official warning about activity that could indicate preparation for disruption or sabotage of marine infrastructure. The head of the country's military intelligence said a Russian ship had been detected near a wind farm in the North Sea and was mapping out sites. And remember, it was, I think, wasn't it Dutch intelligence that managed to get themselves somehow in control of cameras inside the Internet Research Agency where the Russian troll farms were working? They seem to have really gotten the Russians' number lately. I probably should not say it because then they know already. I'm sure they're targeting Dutch intelligence for all sorts of operations. It won't be my doing, no matter who hears it in the shower. Anyway, we saw in recent months Russian actors tried to uncover how the energy system works in the North Sea. It's the first time we have seen this, General Jan Swillens said. Reconnaissance of sensitive sites is not unusual, and Western countries will likely be carrying out similar activity against Russia. The intention is likely to have a series of options available should a conflict escalate. One option might be to damage communications or take down countries' power systems to cause chaos. So far, the evidence of actual sabotage rather than just intelligence gathering for the possibility is more limited. The report raises the possibility such vessels were linked to an incident south of Svalbard last year when an underwater data cable was cut. The cable served the world's largest commercial ground station for satellite communications. Norwegian police have said they believe human activity was behind the sabotage. Well, it would have to be if it was sabotage, but have not officially accused anyone. I guess the other possibility, a giant shark bit it. I don't know. Anyway, on April 13th of this year, Norway expelled 15 Russian officials, accusing them of spying. It was the latest in a wave of expulsions across Europe since the February 2022 invasion of Ukraine. The second wave of invasion, really. In October last year, police declared a major incident in the Shetland Islands after a cable was cut there. The incident severely hampered communications with the mainland and was blamed at the time as having been probably caused by, quote, fishing vessels. Cables are regularly cut by accident, and so far the BBC understands this is not thought to have been the result of hostile activity. There had been one clear and significant act of sabotage, and that was the destruction last September of parts of the Nord Stream pipeline designed to carry gas from Russia to Europe. At the time, many accused Russia of being responsible, but since then other reports have suggested other possibilities, including pro-Ukrainian actors, and investigations are ongoing. Russian military intelligence, the GRU, has also been linked to both sabotage and poisonings. A GRU team linked to the poisoning of Sergei Skripal in Salisbury in 2018 with Novichok nerve agent was also linked to the blowing up of an arms depot in a Czech forest. I don't think we heard anything about that one. We've heard all about Sergei Skripal, but I guess the same GRU team, blowing up a arms depot in the Czech forest. There's a BBC report on it that's linked in case you wanted to read about it, but I think I think it should probably serve for our purposes just to say that BBC is pretty sure that they've been linked and has reported as much. So we'll take their word for it for the moment. All right, let's see. Other things to read through. There are a couple of directions to go, but we have time for one. Why don't I add this one that Scott sent to me. Scott Anderson sent me this one the other day by text. This is, again, switching subjects entirely, going farther afield, but you'll recognize some names and players here, and it's worth keeping up. This a piece from Monday, April 17th, in MalaysiaNow.com. What's Scott doing reading Malaysia Now? Well, I don't know if he's a regular reader. He may certainly have gotten there through other routes, but I bet you can see how he might have arrived there through some sort of web search. Court told of lobbyists' failed bid to arrange Trump-Najib golf game. Why is this important? Well, it's more important immediately to Malaysians, I guess, but we can get the background by reading quickly through this piece. Elliot Broidy is the lobbyist, our subheader here tells us. Elliot Broidy says he was hired to convince top U.S. officials that the DOJ's pursuit of those involved in the 1MDB scandal would be detrimental to bilateral ties. That's the idea here, and that's why it's important and recognizable to the rest of us. A U.S. political lobbyist, the Malaysia Now piece says, has detailed his efforts in 2017 to get the Donald Trump administration to stop a federal investigation into the 1MDB scandal, including a failed bid to arrange a round of golf between the then U.S. president and now jailed former prime minister of Malaysia, Najib Razak. So now we get to see why that's of some importance. And by the way, thinking just quickly of the idea of trying to use undue influence and warn off the American administration, say, don't investigate this enormous crime, which really, damaged the nation and hurt the people of Malaysia by stealing their sovereign wealth fund, not to investigate it, is kind of exactly the sort of corruption that Donald Trump kept trying to get people to believe was going on in Ukraine. And for those reasons, we ought to, A, be anti-Ukraine, B, withhold aid from them, and C, force them to do our bidding in finding dirt on the Bidens. I'm not really certain why it leads to that one, but he needed that, so he just threw that in there. I just find that interesting, that all the things that he was, once again, accusing others of, he was in fact at least considering, though they didn't end the 1MDB investigation. Elliot Broidy, who was a prosecution witness in the money laundering trial of hip-hop star Prakazarel, or Pras Michel, an associate of fugitive Malaysian businessman Low Tek Jo, said he was hired to convince top U.S. officials that the Department of Justice's pursuit of those involved in the scandal would be detrimental to bilateral ties. And note the order of the names. We have been referring to him as Joe Low, but they refer to him as Low Tek Jo. And Prime Minister Najib Razak, in the headline, he's just a Trump-Najib golf game. So I guess they do their names in the Asian style, and it stands to reason they're Malaysian. Anyway, Brody told the court earlier this month that he also met Low in Thailand in 2017, a year after the DOJ filed lawsuits to seize properties tied to 1MDB after investigators uncovered the misappropriation of some $4.5 billion from the Malaysian state company. Banned on Twitter because it's a state company. The Washington Post quoted him as telling the court that he was paid a retainer fee of $8 million and a $1 million appearance fee. They love appearance fees for traveling to Thailand to secretly meet Low, adding that he could have earned $75 million if his efforts had succeeded. In 2017, Brody, a former top Republican fundraiser, was named as a deputy finance chairman of the Republican National Committee following Trump's election victory. He quit the position the following year in the wake of revelations that he had paid a former Playboy model $1.6, not billion, but $1 million in return for her silence about a sexual affair that he may or may not have had with her. In 2020, he pleaded guilty to illegal lobbying, but was later given a presidential pardon by Trump. He then struck a deal with the FBI to cooperate with the DOJ in cases involving Low and his associates. Najib, who eventually met Trump, after all, in September of 2017, at the height of the storm created by the 1MDB scandal, is currently serving a 12-year jail sentence over the SRC International case, which I'm not familiar with, involving the misappropriation of 42 million, I think Malaysian, what's their currency? It says RM. Is it rupees or something like that? They borrowed the name from India. I'm not sure. We can look it up while the music's playing just so that we know what it is. I'm ashamed to say I don't know what the Malaysian currency actually is. And we'll find out really quickly. Nope, not rupee. It would be foolish to imagine that it was that, but that was the only thing that came to mind. I've never heard of the Malaysian currency unit. It's the ringgit, or I hope I'm pronouncing it even close to correct. RINGGIT. Malaysians can DM me or use the KITM hashtag to tell me how to pronounce the thing and admonish me for not knowing. Apparently the name ringgit derived from the Spanish silver money that was widely used in ancient times. How ancient could it be if it was Spanish? I don't know. But very old, and Malaysians chime in. Let me know what you think about this. What do you think about the former prime minister being in prison, and how interesting is that? And wonder whether he's sitting around saying, how come the American president isn't in prison? This is ridiculous. Anyway, time now to end the show and hand it over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Coming up next, here's what he's got in store for you. Let's see. No one in their right mind believes a fine of almost $1 billion will have any effect on Fox's continuous misrepresentations, outright lies, and overt propaganda. So look out for that on the show. That'll be The Viewpoint coming to you next, along with other stories from around the country and around the world, some of which I can tell you about next.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning.
In the shower.
David Waldman.
Right, I'm not in the shower, just the radio. Okay, well anyway, rest of the menu for today. Oh boy. The Iowa Senate advanced the bill to loosen child labor laws. We heard about that. Concerned with the safety of process servers and his deputies, an Idaho sheriff has declined to serve legal notices on heavily armed Ammon Bundy. Isn't that how Jones says it? We'll see you tomorrow.